Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Closing Strong, our weekly series to get us through the end of this historic election cycle. I'm Tara McGowan, founder and publisher of COURIER, joined by my good friend and Hopium Chronicles Substack writer, Simon Rosenberg. We have a absolutely jam-packed show for you all. Today, we are talking to Attorney General Josh Stein from North Carolina, who is also the candidate for governor running against Mark Robinson in the state. We also brought on Cardinal Pine senior political reporter Michael McElroy from the Courier Network, who's on the ground in North Carolina covering the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and the mis and disinformation that has been spreading there. As if that was not enough, we are also talking to Congressman Colin Allred, who is running against Ted Cruz for the U.S. Senate seat for Texas. So we have a lot to get into, but Simon, how are you feeling? What is the state of the race right now? It's also been an insane week on the Harris-Walz campaign.
Yeah, and I'm really excited for this show. We've got a great lineup today. Listen, I feel good. The polling has been remarkably steady and consistent now for weeks. The vice president has a 2, 3, 4-point national lead. She's doing better in the battleground states than Trump is. She's closer to 270. Our Senate polling, I think, has continued to hold. I still think that Montana's still up for grabs. The House Democrats are very optimistic. I mean, to me, sort of the big thing I'm thinking about this week and trying to get my head around is that we're entering sort of an unprecedented phase in a recent presidential campaign because we don't have an October presidential debate. And historically, there were 1 or 2 debates in October, and those were the things that kind of shook up the electorate and let people know that an election was taking place and it was time to start paying attention. We don't have that this time. And I think what it means is that the 2 campaigns have an extra burden. They have more work to do to keep the intensity and to keep talking to voters. They don't have this thing that was doing that work for them in the past. It's requiring the campaigns to have ingenuity, to test new things, to be testing out new ways of reaching people. And a part of what's going to happen, the winner of this election, may come down to how well the campaigns and the candidates communicate this level of intensity and execute traditional political work in the final month, because they're going to have to carry more of that burden themselves. And I think that, to me, what we've seen this week is the Harris campaign, innovating and, talking to every voter and doing all sorts of new stuff, which you'll get into, Tara. It's also a sign that I think we have a greater capacity to close strong than they do. I mean, we knew that. Something you and I have been discussing, but I think it's now even more true, particularly as Trump kind of disappears. They don't have great tools. I mean, we've got more ads, we got more money, we got more volunteers, we got more voter contact. And I think what you're seeing, if I'm right, that we can close strong, you would start to see some evidence in the early vote that Democrats were sort of outperforming Republicans in the limited early vote we've had so far. And that's the case. I mean, the data we have is that we're doing better than 2020 in the early vote. I don't think any of us expected that to be the case. And so the early vote data, it's very early, can't jump to any conclusions, but it's encouraging that this whole theory of the case, that we had more tools to reach voters, we could drive our turnout up and win the election, at least it's happening in the early stages of this early vote phase.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of positive signals. And I think, something that we saw this week from the Harris-Walz campaign, after weeks of a lot of hand-wringing by traditional media outlets and journalists on Twitter and otherwise about how Kamala Harris wasn't doing enough press, right? We heard that for a while. Nobody can say that. Nobody can argue that right now. I feel like she has been everywhere this week, and also in a really, really smart, strategic way has been on a variety of different programs, from The View to Howard Stern to the late night shows to my favorite, Call Her Daddy, a massively popular podcast in this country, especially for young women of all backgrounds and party affiliations. It's interesting because the traditional press still found a way to complain about that she wasn't doing more serious interviews, and that was an unserious interview. And I just thought that debate, if you can call it that, was hysterical, and also had a backlash effect if they had any intention of trying to get a point across to the campaign, because what it ultimately did, the criticism of her going on Call Her Daddy, brought a lot more attention to that podcast. And I don't know if you listened to the full thing, Simon, but
I did.
I did the other day, and I learned so much about Kamala Harris, and I feel like I have followed her and her career very closely, but it was really exceptional to have her sit for 40 minutes in an unedited conversation with Alex about really, really, really important issues, especially to women, but to all people in this country. She spoke for a couple of minutes about incest and exceptions in abortion and reproductive rights legislation, and to talk about something that is that difficult and traumatic for a lot of audiences and things of that nature in a way, and to address it head on and to talk about the human impact of abortion bans and the egregious laws and agenda of the Trump campaign when it comes to this, to an audience of women who are less politically engaged, I thought was profound. I think it got a little bit lost in all of the coverage of her just doing the damn podcast in terms of what she actually spoke about and how personal she got about some of those conversations and stories from her background and her friends and her family throughout her life, and how those shaped her and her leadership and her positions on these issues.
And I think it gets to something, Tara, we talked about in a previous episode, which is that these legacy media interviews where basically she's being asked to respond to a series of Republican talking points and attacks, like what happened in the Dana Bash interview at CNN, those interviews are not informative. You don't learn a lot. What you're learning is you're learning more about sort of the Republican attack lines against the Democrats than you really are learning about Kamala Harris and what she wants to do for the country. And I think that I had the same reaction about Call Her Daddy as I did to the Stephanie Ruhle interview when we talked about this, is that I felt like I got to see and hear more about her than in any kind of legacy media interview. The expansiveness, the length, right? That she could air out answers to important things. And that I think that this is really a moment where the legacy media, and this is sort of what happened in the 60 Minutes interview too, where it was a very traditional kind of like, here's all the problems with you and let's go through them, as opposed to like, hey, what do you want to do for the country, right? Which is the stuff that people care about. The stuff that people care about are the things like, Kamala, you're running for president. How come? I mean, tell us. And I love the way that Alex Cooper started the interview by saying, how are things going? Which is like what you would say to a friend, right? And you know what? It put her at ease. I think Alex Cooper got more out of her because of it, because there was a sense that this was going to be fair-minded and she was going to say her piece, as opposed to going into these kind of defensive crouches you get in when you're in very deeply adversarial journalistic settings. And I do think the campaign was really smart about flooding the zone, and about just being out there for people to see. They've dominated social this week. They've taken control of the discourse of the campaign. They're driving the agenda this week. And they're doing what I was saying earlier, is that I think this is also them taking responsibility for recognizing that they're going to have to be louder than they perhaps thought they were, because of the lack of a presidential debate as a galvanizing thing that mobilizes voters to go vote. And so again, this campaign, when we all look back on this is a campaign that rebuilt the plane while it was flying. They have innovated in really profound and important ways that I think all of us are just beginning to understand. This week is unlike any week we've ever seen in modern presidential politics. And I just want to give, big hats off, obviously, to Kamala and to Governor Walz, but also to the campaign. The campaign is dealing with what's in front of them. Like every election you have to. They're building a campaign for this election, not for some other election. They really do deserve a lot of credit in my view.
I agree. And I think all of the criticism by traditional outlets, et cetera, it's about them. It's not about the campaign. It's petty, and it's about them thinking that, they're the gatekeepers and the arbiters, right? And actually getting the information out to audiences who are not paying attention to, cable news or those sort of formats is the most important thing the campaign can do. So we have, as we mentioned, a lot of amazing guests this week. So I think we should probably get to it.
We've got a great guest now. Joining us is Josh Stein, the Attorney General of North Carolina, who's also our candidate for governor. Josh, welcome.
Thanks, Simon. Great to be with you and Tara.
So the big story, obviously, is Helene and the recovery efforts. Can you give us an update on how things are going?
It's going to be a long haul, and we hope folks have the endurance to stick with it. Folks from the outside, I have no doubt that the folks in Western North Carolina will have the endurance. It's incredible to watch neighbor helping neighbor, folks coming together and looking out for each other, and they have to. Many communities today, nearly 2 weeks later, they still don't have power and they don't have water. It's really hard living, but folks are looking out for each other. They're taking care of each other. I was in Black Mountain last week, and the local hotel there, the Monte Vista Hotel, had converted itself into a food distribution center, and they were feeding the entire community. And it was just incredibly uplifting to see it firsthand. The stories of first responders saving lives, doing swift boat rescues, getting people off their roofs, just incredibly moving and inspiring. And then tremendous stories of heartbreak. The fire chief in Black Mountain told me about how a buddy of his up the mountain lost his entire family, his parents, his wife, his children, a mudslide took out. And so there is going to be incredible pain and families. We don't know how many hundreds of people are dead yet. It's going to take a little while to do all that work. You have the people helping people. You have the nonprofits who act quickly and do incredible work. I was in Marion, and the Baptist men were feeding people at a rate I've never seen before. Just boom, 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 as the cars wound their way through the massive parking lot. Because folks don't have refrigeration. They don't have stoves. They don't have any way to feed themselves. And then you have local governments rising to meet the moment. And then the state government has been there. Emergency management with our State Department of Public Safety is coordinating all of the response and doing a remarkable job. DOT had well over 1,000 people within days up there clearing roads so that the power crews could come in to repair the lines, so that the phone companies could come in and lay more cable. It's just been this massive, massive undertaking. And the federal government has been a strong partner. Within days, the president announced that he was going to give a 100% reimbursement rate to the state of North Carolina for our clearing efforts, which just takes huge relief off of our state budgets. We're going to need the federal government to continue to step up. FEMA has been tremendous. Administrator Criswell has been on the ground. She was here nonstop for a week. I assume she's now in Florida with the hurricane coming there now, but she's been an incredible partner. And those folks are out in the community giving emergency relief to people. Everybody can get $750 like that to help with daily expenses, whether you need new clothes, new toothbrush, whatever you need. They're going to be there for the long haul to give people the relief and loans that will help them get back on their feet. U.S. Department of Defense has deployed people from the 101st and people from the 82nd, and they're there on the ground helping to clear roads. It really has been a positive story of all aspects of our society, from the government, federal, state, and local, to the nonprofits and the private corporations. I was in Charlotte yesterday recognizing NASCAR and Food Lion and the Carolina Panthers. I mean, just those entities alone did something like $8 million within the first couple of days to buy relief for folks. So there are a lot of positive stories, and sadly, there are those who are trying to exploit it for political gain.
Attorney General, thank you for being here. And that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about, because in extreme weather disasters, that is one of those moments that you actually really do see everyone come together. I always think about that Mr. Rogers quote that makes its way around the internet after any crisis or disaster about looking for the helpers. And you just talked about all of them from the local, state, and federal level and nonprofits. Yet something that we've seen, certainly our reporters on the ground at Cardinal and Pine, our newsroom in the state, was an extraordinary and fast movement of disinformation and misinformation about relief efforts. And as a accidental student of right-wing disinformation and Trump's playbook in particular, obviously we are in a really, really, really close election year, and your state plays a really, really important role. It could be the state that the outcome hinges on. And so I'm curious, talk a little bit, without amplifying the disinformation, which we know is never a good practice, but what that has been like to have to counter on top of all of the actual life-saving relief efforts on the ground, and why you think this moved so quickly in particular, given this moment politically as well.
Yeah, the cynicism behind the disinformation is really painful. I have a buddy up in Avery County. They don't have internet. They barely have cell service. You have to go to specific locations. Incredibly hard to communicate. They don't have power. The roads are washed out. Entire communities are gone, homes and the people who lived in them. And so they're just trying to survive day to day. And he said, even without the ability to get information, the disinformation and rumors have spread like wildfire. And so he's like, I don't know how it happens, but it just happens because I think it confirms people's worst fears that the government isn't there to help them, but it is there to harm them. And they were saying that if you sign up for FEMA, they're going to take your property. Well, there's nothing you can do more to dissuade somebody to sign a piece of paper that can get them dollars in their pockets today to help them and their family than to say that your property is going to be at risk if you do that. And it's just devastating because these folks are entitled to that help as Americans by law. And we want them to get what they are entitled to because it will help them. It will help them. It will help their families. For them to not seek what they're entitled to because someone thinks that they get political gain out of feeding people's fear of others, it's just outrageous. It's outrageous. So folks are doing everything we can to counter it. You counter it with truth to the extent you can, to hoping that they can hear it. The Department of Public Safety has a fact versus fiction section on their webpage. They never needed that before, but they do today. So it's just a matter of trying to get out as much information that's helpful and real to counter the falsehoods. But it's a difficult battle, I have to be honest with you.
Yeah, and we know that most of it has been coming from right-wing media and from the Republican presidential candidate, Trump himself, out of his mouth, saying a lot of things to try to shape a narrative, both in North Carolina, Georgia, and nationally around this. I was really heartened, though, to see, and Cardinal Pine covered it, that's how I saw it, but that Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican, came out and sort of told those folks to stand down. And I think that's really important because trusted messengers from communities that might be more targeted or susceptible to hearing that disinformation, hearing it from a Republican matters. Would you agree?
Representative Chuck Edwards, who's the congressman who represents that whole western tip of North Carolina, very conservative guy, has a pretty hot post that point by point refutes the nonsense that people are spewing because he knows these are his people and he knows that these resources can help his communities recover. So he's angry too.
Yeah, and I think just commenting on this, I think this has been for the national community of people who work on these matters, this has been a before and after moment. I think that not only are they going to have to pre-position, trucks and supplies, but they're going to have to pre-position truth, before all of these things to sort of help soften the information ground, not just and it's just a whole different way of having to think about this.
I want to underscore that a bit because the thing we think about a lot at COURIER is how a lot of reporters, even where they exist locally, as we know there aren't so many, they're not as incentivized to talk about the good that government does all the time. And I think there's like a positive opportunity and outcome here because this is one of those moments where government does and can step up and really has, especially in this moment. And so there might be a silver lining there of sorts where there is more presence and proactive communication about the efforts that state, local, and federal government do play to help people recover and rebuild.
There's a lot of stories that need to be told, but there also is a lot of work that needs to be done. And we're going to need the federal government to pass massive emergency relief bills. I mean, the extent of devastation to our roads, both state and federal roads, it's just impossible to understand. Like rivers reformed. They went outside their banks and now have a new shape. And that shape didn't care that there was a road that went along the river. And so every couple hundred yards, that road is washed out. And to rebuild these roads are going to take years and it's going to take billions of dollars.
And so let's get to the other thing that's happening, which is there's an election happening in North Carolina. Josh, you have an opponent, Mark Robinson, who's been in the news a little bit recently. How are things going?
I feel good about our race. My head is down and I'm running hard, but I like where we are. I like the fact that we've been around the state more times than I can count. Felt like I did it all yesterday included. People are responding to our vision, which is fundamentally positive, forward-looking, and welcoming. It's about fighting for everybody, creating opportunity for everybody, tapping everybody's potential for our collective good interest. That is what people want. They want somebody who's focused on issues that matter in their lives, whether it's good public schools and strong teacher pay. The Republican legislature has dropped North Carolina to the bottom and per pupil investment. It's about having an economy that works for everybody. safe neighborhoods where parents don't have to worry about their kids playing after school. And it's about our personal freedoms being protected. A woman's right to choose is truly on the ballot in November here in North Carolina. And voters are embracing that vision. And the guy I'm running against, who has been in the news a lot. But here's the thing about that whole CNN story is everyone who'd paid any attention to this guy before that CNN story hit knew he was fundamentally unfit for any public office, let alone to be the governor of North Carolina. And so all it did, I told my wife about the story when it came out, and she said, we didn't learn anything new. I mean, there's nothing new in there. We knew about his predilections. We knew that he glorified Nazis. We knew he didn't like Jewish people. We knew these things. And I said, yes, it's true. And we knew he disrespected women. We knew he glorified violence, just totally, totally unfit. And I'm really encouraged. We want this to be a great year for Democrats in North Carolina, up and down the ballot. Obviously, we want Vice President Harris to win North Carolina, because if she does, I believe she will be the president. There's really not a path to the presidency for Trump without North Carolina and the red column. So we're working hard on that. But we have an incredible slate of council of state candidates. And the contrast may be less media salacious as my opponent, but the contrast in the character and the quality of the candidates is amazing. I mean, the Democrats have this great slate of candidate, and the Republicans have put forward this most extreme slate I've ever seen. Superintendent of public instruction, the attorney general, lieutenant governor, it's just up and down. We've got to break the supermajority. We're only one vote shy in each chamber. So we have our work cut out for us over the next 28 days, but we're prepared to do it, and grateful for every bit of help that you all and folks around the country have done to support us. If folks want to keep helping, joshstein.org, we will put those resources to good use to try to make this a great year for Democrats up and down the ballot.
And it really is turnout game in North Carolina. We know you guys are a true battleground, and also voters there have a history of a little bit of an independent streak or ticket splitting, right? You've had a Democratic governor, but Trump won the state by, I think, 77,000 or so votes in 2020. Close, but not as close as some of the other battlegrounds, but obviously very close. How are you feeling about turnout, and especially in the aftermath of the storm and the recovery efforts?
I had an interesting conversation with a guy in Mecklenburg. Mecklenburg is a critical bellwether county. It's the second most populous county to Wake County, but it has more Democrats than any other county. And yet in 2022, the number of Democrats who turned out in Mecklenburg versus Wake, that's Charlotte versus Raleigh, substantially less, something like 70, 80,000 fewer votes out of Mecklenburg than Wake, even though there are more Democrats. So everyone's been focused on trying to get Mecklenburg excited about voting in the election. And I talked to a guy who's an independent yesterday, lives in a suburban neighborhood of Charlotte, just sort of your standard suburban, middle of the road kind of community. He said he's had 3 or 4 Democratic door knocks this cycle and not a single one from a Republican. And that completely meshes with my perception of what's going on around the state, is that we have a couple hundred paid canvassers through the coordinated campaign, great alignment. You know, Anderson Clayton, our great state party chair, working with my campaign, the Council of State, the presidential campaign. We're all in alignment and working together to get those door knocks done. And I just don't see it on the Republican side, and I hope it makes a difference.
I just want to report that we're now getting in early vote data from around the country. Democrats are overperforming our 2020 numbers, which is not something we all thought would happen for a variety of reasons. And so there is a lot of now both anecdotal stories and also now real data that they don't have the same kind of field operation that we have. I mean, we sort of knew that from news accounts, but it's really starting to show up in the early data in the states where people are starting to vote in large numbers. It's an encouraging thing. I mean, our side is fired up. People are working hard. They've been working hard for years now. And as you know, Josh, your state, there was early investment there. I mean, my Hopium community was part of it. We've raised over $700,000 now for the North Carolina Democratic Party. And I feel like, you know, everywhere in the battleground, we are going to have the biggest and most powerful grassroots army that we've ever had. And on their side, they just didn't make the same kind of investments. And this stuff is really going to matter in these closing days of the election. So it's encouraging to hear, because that's what we're seeing in other places as well.
That's great. Happy to hear that.
Well, listen, thank you. We know how busy you are. Hopefully you'll have time to walk your dogs this morning.
They want me to.
And listen, good luck. I mean, we're really proud of you, and just good luck to the people of North Carolina. You guys have suffered so much, and it was so unexpected, and the scale of the devastation was so beyond anything that anybody could have imagined. And so, our hearts are with you, and we'll be working hard to make sure that legislation gets passed too, Josh, when it's time, assuming that, particularly if we win the House and the Senate, it's going to be a lot easier to get done. But we wish you good luck, and, congratulations on the progress you've made so far, and bring it home.
Thanks, Sam. Fair. Y'all take care. Appreciate it.
I am so excited to bring on the show today my colleague and our senior political reporter in North Carolina for our newsroom, Cardinal Pine, Michael McElroy. Before we get started in the conversation, we're going to be talking to Michael about the coverage that he and his colleagues on the ground in North Carolina have been doing on the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and the devastation in Western North Carolina, and also the misinformation and disinformation that's been spreading. We're also speaking to Attorney General Josh Stein about today. So just to tee up this conversation, here is a clip of President Trump speaking about the aftermath of Hurricane Helene.
Kamala spent all her FEMA money, billions of dollars, on housing for illegal migrants. They stole the FEMA money just like they stole it from a bank so they could give it to their illegal immigrants.
FEMA coming under fire for running low on funds for storm victims while spending $500 million on illegal immigrants.
And FEMA's running low on funds because they're blowing it all on illegals. We're learning how $500 million of FEMA money, your hard-earned taxpayer cash, has been helping out illegal immigrants.
And by the way, it's $1 billion of FEMA money. Biden in 2022 created a program that allows the transfer of FEMA money.
FEMA is out of money, and wait till you hear the reason why. The Biden-Harris administration, we now have learned, raided FEMA's piggy bank for other endeavors. They took over $1 billion of FEMA funds supposed to be available for national emergencies, leave the money where it belongs, in a lockbox for emergencies when they happen for FEMA. Do the people of Appalachia just not look the right way? Maybe you don't like how they vote historically.
Michael, you've been on the ground dealing with the aftermath and covering it and reporting on it from the storm and the devastation. How did watching that string of clips make you feel?
Well, I know it to be untrue. And so the feeling is maybe a little different. But what it makes me think about is the people that don't know that it's untrue, that don't have the context. And really the problem with a lot of this is that it's actually there's a lot of moving parts to the answer of why it's untrue and why it's blatantly untrue. And disinformation loves it when the lie is simple, but the truth is a little bit more involved, because people just love to hear the lie and move on.
What I'm really interested in hearing, Michael, from you is we know that disinformation and misinformation spreads like wildfire and spreads very quickly at the local level as well, even if it comes from a national voice or news network. And so talk about the impact that has had that you've encountered on the ground.
Well, the people on the ground, and I should say that Cardinal Pine is on the ground. I have not yet been one of the people that have got into Western North Carolina. My colleague Dylan Roney, as we speak, is doing amazing work right now on the ground, talking to folks. But I have spoken to a lot of folks who have been affected and whose families have been affected. And I will say that most of the people who are dealing with these things right now and struggling to get their water turned on and clear their roads and even make a functional path from their house to the road, they know that FEMA is on the ground. For example, they know that the National Guard has been there. And so really, to me, the dangerous places where this disinformation collects are in the areas that are close by, but may not be the most directly affected yet. So they're close by to be really concerned about their neighbors, but they're not directly affected. There's a tweet. I mean, I know that Trump says these things in rallies. It gets amplified for a national audience on Fox News. But to me, the really dangerous battlefield for this is smaller users with smaller followings, because they're the ones that are doing a lot of the spreading. And there was this particular tweet or a meme that really stuck out at me because this was several days after the storm, after Governor Roy Cooper had already had multiple press conferences, had already deployed, at that point, it probably would have been a little under 1,000 members of the National Guard, already had declared the state of emergency and the disaster declaration, had already done so much, and it was demonstrably true. And there was someone who posted a tweet that says, has he even held a press conference? Question 1. 2, why hasn't he called out the National Guard? And this is someone with a quaint username. I don't think a Russian bot, I really do believe is a genuine user who is spreading these things. These things were demonstrably true. It could have taken 5 seconds less than 5 seconds for her to have figured that out on her own. And so that's where it gets really dangerous, in my view, because that's the kindling that spreads these wildfires. The arsonist is the person who's saying the disinformation, but the good faith spread of wrong information is the kindling that turns it into a wildfire. And so I think that is the thing that I keep talking about, or thinking about the most in all this, is these folks are primed already. And I do believe it's a relatively small amount of people that are primed to believe these things. But they already believe that the federal government is a source of evil and is here to take advantage. So the disinformation reaches that audience because the people who are telling the lies intentionally know that's what their audience believe. We talk a lot at COURIER, we talk a lot about Cardinal, about knowing our audience and meeting them where they are and going to make sure we go to them with the information. Well, so do disinformation actors. They also know their audience very, very well. And so they know that there is already a suspicion of FEMA. So every made up lie that they tell about FEMA then becomes proof to that pre-existing belief about FEMA. And that is why this stuff is so dangerous. And to actually answer your question, because I don't think I answered your question, but the people I talk to are the ones who are on the emergency responders who are on the ground. And it's like we saw in multiple press conferences the other day, even Republican officials saying that this disinformation is harming morale and making it harder for them to do their jobs. So the disinformation isn't just this thing that violates the ideal of truth and justice or whatever. It also makes it harder to bring aid to the people who need it. It also makes it more likely that these people who may distrust FEMA but actually need their help because their homes have been destroyed will not reach out to FEMA get the aid they need. That is at least in this case, in this Hurricane Helene disinformation case, that is the real danger of this kind of thing.
That's right. And I mean, a big reason that we started COURIER was because we know that disinformation is the most effective and dangerous in a vacuum, right? If there isn't actual good factual information reaching people where they are. So to your point, that is what you guys do at Cardinal and Pine and what we do at all of our newsrooms. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, I've been following your reporting really, really closely. It's how I have informed myself about the aftermath. And if you do only follow Cardinal and Pine, you see all of the relief efforts. You're hearing from Republican and Democratic elected officials alike in the state who are talking about the incredible support from the federal government, from FEMA, from local and state government and nonprofits and agencies. And you're hearing from people on the ground who are opening up their offices. Or I saw a post you guys did on Planet Fitness becoming a space where people can go get water and resources and supplies. But we know that, you have to actually get that information in front of people. So talk a little bit about how you and the team on the ground think about your audiences and think about that, getting that information to break through when there is so much and to your point, misinformation, information that's spread in good faith, but is wrong because of the disinformation that's been seeded.
Well, it's certainly a challenge, but I think that the thing that makes it possible is having such an outstanding team. And Tara, you get credit for that because you helped build this team. But so the Planet Fitness thing is a good example because it's a straightforward thing. It's just a map of locations where Planet Fitness is opening up their facilities so that people whose homes have been destroyed can get showers, can get things like that. And that was the idea of our newest hire, Jessica Simmons. She's fantastic. And it was a simple thing. It's not some investigative piece, right? We have to do those things too, of course. And we have to do long form. I just wrote 2,000 words on the article version of this disinformation thing, right? But it's not all that. It's these small things. It's knowing how people get their news. It's using the same, honestly, it's using the same tools that disinformation folks use for harm, that people get their news from social media. So we take this one little bit, this very simple idea that can be shared in a visual and in a map, and put it very quickly on all of our sites that go out to the people where they get it the most. And something like the map, they don't have to read that, and they can get the full sense of, hey, look, I live close to this thing. I haven't had a shower in weeks. There is no way they would have known that unless folks tell them about it. And now I can see visually quickly, boom, I went from not knowing what to do about my shower to now knowing exactly what I could do in a matter of seconds. And I think that our team does a great job. And Billy, who is our main person, Billy Baller is our main person, is fantastic about organizing all of us and making sure that we start answering people's questions by asking them ourselves, like, what do people need? What is the biggest need? What is the best authority on that? And how can we quickly tell that to folks? Where are the roads closed? The big one is about what's going to happen with elections, or one of the big ones is what's going to happen with elections, because so much of the election infrastructure was wiped out as well. So the Board of Elections has had meetings, they've had things, and the answers are, I don't know everything yet. So we have to find the best way to tell folks, this is what we know now. We don't know this other thing, but as soon as we know it, we will tell you about it.
I guess part of what I'm just going to reflect on, and we're just discussing is, and I've been writing about this today myself, is how much of the areas that were impacted by Helene are Republican areas that are with Republican politicians, Republican voters, and how MAGA sort of turned on its own people here in a way that makes all this even some ways more shocking and wild. And to see the kind of condemnation that we're now seeing from Senator Tillis and the congressman from Western North Carolina, and you've now started seeing it in DeSantis's administration in Florida, that this monster that Trump created, just like in Springfield, by the way, Ohio, which is a Republican city with Republican elected officials, mostly Republican voters, whose city was being terrorized by the MAGA disinformation. There's something so unbelievably dark about this and malicious and malevolent that it's hard to even believe. I mean, this is people who are, and particularly in North Carolina, right? This is not wealthy people. I mean, yeah, there was Asheville, but I mean, most of the folks in Western North Carolina are not wealthy people. This is not a place of means. And to sort of, when everything has been lost and when their lives are on the line, to intervene in this way feels like an escalation in some ways in their tactics, or a sign of their desperation, right? Maybe is another way to think about it.
I was going to say desperation, right? This down to the election.
And North Carolina was slipping away from them because of Mark Robinson, and they needed to do something to fundamentally alter the trajectory of what's happening there. And so it's also amazing that the RNC chairman, Michael Whatley, is from North Carolina. Laura Trump is from North Carolina. And so senior people running the whole Trump operation are from the state, and that Trump turned on the people of North Carolina. He didn't turn on Democrats. He didn't turn on, in his sick mind, he believed somehow this was going to hurt Kamala Harris, but I think it hurt his own peeps, and I don't know. I've just been sort of stunned.
Well, you have been very nice to ask me on your show, and so I hate to repay that kindness by disagreeing with you.
Okay, go ahead.
And just one piece of it. I am not stunned, and nor do I see it as an escalation in tactic. What I see it is that the scope is bigger because the event is bigger. Hurricane Helene is without question the worst natural disaster that's ever happened to the state. But what he's doing is stuff he's done all the time. It's just that scope of damage is so much bigger that the ripples, as Tara mentioned, are bigger. But Donald Trump has either done these things. I mean, because when I get the sense, when I watch him talk about those things, I don't see a strategy at play. What I see is the same impulse response that he's done kind of his entire career. I mean, you talk about, I mean, for the people of Springfield, that is a dramatic lie. That is an intense lie. It's something that
they admitted, Michael, right? That JD Vance came out and admitted was a lie. They don't care.
And it would take a horror novelist a long time to craft that thing. He just off the top of his head did it. And so the people of Western North Carolina, especially, who, other than Asheville, as you mentioned, are in fact deeply, many of them low income. The Medicaid expansion that we recently passed helped a lot of the people in those areas right now. And Medicaid expansion was stalled in North Carolina because of the Republican legislature. And Donald Trump, under Donald Trump's administration, it wasn't even possible, right? Because it took the Biden administration to make Medicaid expansion even possible. So if you look at that, Donald Trump has been hurting those voters his entire political career because of the policies that have been in place. So I think the damage that he has done to those areas is not new. It's not a switch that's just been done. It's not even a dimmer switch that has been bumped up. It's the same poisonous light that he has been casting on these areas for a long time. And so I will say that I don't know that it's an escalation. I think the effects are certainly amplified because the storm is such a bigger deal than a lot of other things. But you do see, as you mentioned, Tom Tillis, you mentioned Chuck Edwards. I think the thing that makes me, they push back against the disinformation, I think, effectively and pretty severely. Even Tim Moore, the House Speaker, has pushed back against some of the more flagrant pieces of disinformation. But zero of them named Donald Trump. Zero of them named Mark Robinson. And Mark Robinson has been one of the biggest spouters of the disinformation here, the more flagrant. I think they're neck and neck for at least in North Carolina specific, for flagrant disinformation over the last week. But zero of the Republicans who have been pushing back against them by name. And so it's kind of like this, there's a lot of disinformation out there. And politically, I kind of get it. Fine, I get it. But there's been a lot of passive voice, this disinformation that has just kind of come up on its own, I guess, as opposed to being launched by someone. But I
That's
think
an important point, Michael. You might want to write a piece on that. I mean, it is because we're giving them credit for pushing back, but they're actually not naming the perpetrators of it, which because of the political implications. So we need to.
I do think they still should get credit. I really do. But the credit with the asterisk that they're not calling out the actual people doing it. And they didn't even mention Fox News. But I will say that you mentioned what the political effect and whether it's, I just don't know. There's a Republican sheriff who was very angry the other day and his pushing back against disinformation. He made the case that this disinformation is harming the morale of the first responders and making things difficult. And he was passionate about it. And he said, I won't apologize. I know it sounds like I'm being emotional. I won't apologize for it. He didn't mention Trump either. And I have no doubt that many folks in that area will continue to vote for Donald Trump. So I don't know what the effect is because it's so easy. Disinformation makes it so easy to separate the disinformation from its source. In fact, it's a cloaking device. It's part of the weaponry is to mask the originator. And so I think a lot of people, just like some Republican in Springfield said something like, I'm still going to vote for him, but I wish he'd knock it off. Right. And I think that disconnect is common. And I think that it will hold true. It's hard for me to imagine a full-on Trump supporter before Helene now going, well, no, now I can't. Because again, this is not a new pattern. Trump has done things like this a million times. And so it's hard for me to imagine. Now, maybe that's just pessimism. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's hard for me to imagine.
No, and I do find a little bit of hope in it, to Simon's earlier point, that it's also just a sign of desperation because they are very worried about North Carolina. This whole election could hinge on North Carolina. He won by a close margin against Biden in 2020. North Carolina hasn't gone for a Democratic presidential candidate since Obama in 2008. It did not go to Obama in 12. So you guys are also, especially before Hurricane Helene, but obviously continuing through Election Day, covering the elections. There are so many important ones up and down the ballot. I think there's a chance to break the Republican supermajority in the state house in North Carolina that has passed egregious abortion bans, among other really egregious policies in the state that are impacting communities. Talk a little bit about your and your colleagues' conversations with voters. What are you hearing? What are some of the things that are coming up a lot for people in the communities that will inevitably decide by voting or not voting, and certainly by who they vote for if they show up, the state and potentially the whole country?
Well, it is my job as a political correspondent from North Carolina to say definitively that the election will hinge on North Carolina. If Donald Trump loses North Carolina, I've seen very few actual reasonable other paths. So the people that we've been talking to, and we do talk to folks a lot on the ground. Now, sometimes we can talk to, because of just of access of where we are, right? We tend sometimes we try our best to talk to kind of lots of different voters, but sometimes the people that we talk to tend to represent similar concerns or similar demographics or similar areas. But across the board, the people that we talk to, a lot of them mention many of the same things. The economy is a big one. It is. The economy is a big one. Affordability is a big one. And so are abortion rights and reproductive rights. And so are climate change. And so these three things will pop up in most voters we talk to. And this is sometimes across politics. So it's not just we talk to Democrats and they're concerned about Democrat talking points. I mean, everybody is concerned about affordability. And even many Republicans are worried about climate change, even if they can't bring themselves to use the term. They're still worried about the issue for sure. So those are the three big ones. But people are worried about, and people in North Carolina are worried about things that everyone is worried about because there's really big hinge points in this election. But I will say that the things that we have to keep remembering is the storylines have this national narrative, right? And this national focus and threats to democracy from DC. But the people who are worried about it, they're worried about these things in their hometowns. They're worried about it for their neighbors. They're worried about it on their streets. Most people, when they talk about climate change, they will talk about the worldwide story, but then they didn't start to talking about, I'm worried about what's going to happen if my house is flooded. I'm worried about what's going to happen if my town is deluged. Before Helene, one of the biggest climate change worries in Western North Carolina were wildfires. We haven't had one in Western North Carolina the way they have been in others, but the conditions are there. Folks are warning about it. It's only a matter of time, to use that terrible cliche. So people are worried about these things, but they take these national narratives and they express that concern at the local level. And that's one of the things that we try and do in our coverage, is try and match these national concerns, these national narratives to the people where they are and how they're living their lives and what they then can do about it from their street at their voting precinct.
Such important.
It's amazing
work.
stuff. I know. It's amazing stuff you guys are doing.
Thank you, Michael, so much for joining us and for all the work you're doing on the ground. For folks who are in North Carolina or who have friends or family there, tell them to follow Cardinal and Pine and Michael's great reporting. Thank you, Michael.
Great. Thank you.
And we are now thrilled to be joined by Congressman Colin Allred, who is running for the U.S. Senate seat in Texas against Ted Cruz, who I know folks watching are well aware of. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us at such a busy time in your campaign cycle.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I appreciate you all.
No, we're really excited to have you on, and again, grateful for the time. So tell us, before we kind of get into it, how are you feeling? How is it feeling on the ground in your absolutely massive and so consequential state?
It feels really good. And I know that I feel this in a lot of my elections, but now I'm feeling it even more in this one. I know we're breaking through when, just kind of ordinary working folks pause what they're doing to come over and talk to me about the campaign and how they're so excited and there's a guy who was helping us park the car the other day, and he was like, "I'm going to contribute to your campaign." I was like, okay. I mean, thank you so much. I mean, we can't go through a building without, everyone who's working in that building stopping what they're doing. So it feels really good. And I think we've built something that Texans can be proud of. We've had a very broad kind of coalition here, where there are long-term and long-time and respected Republicans who've gotten involved with this campaign here in Texas, and I think it's something that we can all feel like this is a positive for us, and that we'll be going against Ted Cruz and turning the page and doing something that'll be great for our state.
It's great. Glad to hear about the energy on the ground. There's also been some other really incredible indicators of your momentum this past week. We saw the Cook Political Report moved your race, I think, to lean R, which is in the right direction, away from where it was as more of a toss-up state. And also you had some incredible third quarter fundraising numbers. Is that right?
Yeah. So we raised, I guess, $30 million in the last quarter, which I think is
incredible.
Just
hard to
quarter.
imagine. Yeah. And this is going to be the most expensive Senate race in Texas history. But I think what I see in that is that our average donation is $35, and it's ordinary folks giving what they can. It's an act of hope. It's folks from all over. And I think it's a signal about how ready we are in Texas to move on from Ted Cruz. Also, how folks around the country recognize what a threat he is to our democracy. And so it's exciting, but we have to use that because we have a massive state. We're 3 times the size of Michigan. We have more people here in my area in DFW than we do in all of Arizona. I mean, so I get the numbers are big because the state is big, and it has to be that way.
Absolutely.
I don't know if our viewers know, but, Ted Cruz only won by a little bit more than 2 points last time. Joe Biden came within 5 points, right, of Trump in 2020. I mean, this is a lean red state. This is not a red state. It's not, I don't know that it's a purple state yet, Congressman, but we're getting there. And part of my question, I guess my biggest question for you is, what's happening with young people? Because as you know, you have a lot of non-voters in your state historically, there's a whole bunch of reasons we can get into. But has the combination of your candidacy and Kamala Harris coming onto the top of ticket sort of woken up younger people who may be available to you that perhaps are more engaged in the election now? What are you seeing in terms of how the two of you have kind of woken up? There is a huge number of younger African-American and Latino voters in the state that are not regular habitual voters. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, well, before I came to Congress, Simon, you probably know I was a voting rights lawyer, and I often tell folks that Texas is not a red state. We've been a non-voting state, and that's true. It's also even more true, to your point, among young folks. And listen, I think that we have to be honest and say that we've had an increase in energy since Kamala got to the top of the ticket, and that's good because we need that. We've been organizing on the ground on our universities and trying to get young people out to vote here for building this over the course of this campaign coming up to this point. We launched our kind of Young Texans for Allred effort a few weeks ago that's really focused on them as well. But let's also talk about what's happening in Texas, which is that we're experiencing a near total ban on abortion. And this is most applicable in many ways and most readily on the mind of, in many cases, young people. And when I talk to them, this is something that just comes up all the time. This is obviously a point of discussion, I think, all over our campuses in every young person's life. I've talked to young women who've told me how they have a plan to leave the state with their friends if they have to. I mean, these are the conversations that are going on here in Texas. And this is on Ted Cruz. And this is his abortion ban. He is uniquely responsible for it here in Texas because of his career of working towards this, the federal level, putting judges on the courts to do this, but also at the state level, backing extreme legislators, calling for and cheering on the Dobbs decision. So that's a huge motivator as well. But I know this, that every group of our voters in Texas is a group we have to treat with the respect to ask them for the vote, to try and make sure that we are responding to what the issues are that are in their lives. And for us here in Texas, we still need to have more housing, bring down the cost of higher education. I talked to a lot of young people who are worried about gun violence, about the future of the environment. These are all things that Ted Cruz is on the wrong side of and that I want to get to work on.
Yeah, and it's for folks who haven't paid such close attention to Texas, maybe, who have looked at other battleground states. It really has been sort of the petri dish to test out all of the Project 2025 policies that Trump would put in place if he were elected. And to your point, Ted Cruz has been instrumental in helping Texas be that place to be able to advance those egregious policies that they would take nationally. And clearly, with the signs of the momentum that you're building on the ground in this state and the potential here, Ted Cruz is and should be pretty scared. And I think we actually have a clip where he went on, what I think we would all assume would be a very friendly show for him with Sean Hannity just the other day. So let's roll that clip.
I don't know why, but every time you run for re-election, you are maybe the second most hated man behind Donald Trump in politics. They're gunning for you big time, politically speaking.
Well, listen, I wear that as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
I mean, the second most hated man in politics. That's who you... Feels like a little bit of a gift, Congressman. No,
he's earned it. I mean, what can I say? Sometimes I'll begin my talks by talking about all the things that his Republican colleagues have said about him. That John Boehner called him Lucifer, and that Mitt Romney has called him a dangerous demagogue, and that Lindsey Graham joked about if he was murdered on the Senate floor that they'd never get a conviction. These are the folks who are on his side. So, he has earned it. This is also, what happens when you go around and in every interaction you have, you come across as one of the most objectionable people someone has ever met in their life, that you are one of the most selfish people to ever be in public life, that you are somebody who gets in the way of your colleagues ever trying to get anything done. And then when you have to run for re-election and you're in a tough election year, all of a sudden you now want to try and pretend like you're a responsible legislator. And I think, for those of us who are in Congress and we see that, we roll our eyes, but we also then think, this isn't the way it should be, and this is just not how it should be. Since that last election where he won by 2 points, what has he done? Well, he's gone to Cancun when the lights went out. He's tried to overturn an American presidential election. He was the architect in the Senate of that attempt. And he hid in a supply closet when the mob came while I was ready to fight the mob. And he's responsible for this abortion ban that we have here in Texas. And just earlier this year, he took down the toughest border security bill in a generation in a state that we would have benefited more from it than any other state in the country. I mean, he's earned it, and we're going to beat him. And when we do, I think it's going to surprise a lot of folks around the country, and that's okay. I'm used to surprising people with my elections. Nobody thought I'd win in 2018 either. And the Texans, I think, is a place where things can happen quickly. And we've arrived at the, I think, appropriate decision that it's time to turn the page on Ted Cruz.
Congressman, can you talk about, I think one of the most interesting things that we saw was that Liz Cheney came out aggressively for you. I mean, not just, did she sign a letter or anything, right? She made a video. I mean, talk about that. I mean, that was really a remarkable moment in the campaign.
Yeah, if you told me, 7 years ago when I first ran for Congress that I'd be campaigning for Senate with Liz Cheney, I would have thought that something had gone horribly wrong. And I guess you could maybe say that is what happened. But we were friends in the Congress and before she left, and we were friends before January 6th. But then on January 6th, we had a shared experience that I think solidified that, and we've remained pretty close since then. And I think that what her support is about is, yes, our friendship, but also that she understands that we cannot have someone who is as much of a danger to our republic as Ted Cruz still in the United States Senate. That there are certain things that if you do when you're in public office, when you're given the high honor and privilege of representing an entire state, that if you use that high honor and privilege to undermine the foundations of our democracy, that you cannot then come back into office. Or if you do, then you are going to continue to be a threat, but also we'll get more of that. And I like to tell folks that, we used to say the NFL was a copycat league. And, what does that mean? It means that if you see a play that works one week, you'll see it the next week. Well, politics and public service is like that too, where if something works and you get reelected, then you'll probably see more of that. But if you stop it, then you won't see it again. And so part of beating Ted Cruz, I think, is also about protecting our Constitution and our democracy. And I'm proud to have the support of real conservatives like Liz Cheney, who's a real conservative. But we also have a number of actual conservatives here in Texas who've gotten on board. And that's what I mean. It's exciting for us. And this is the way I wanted to run this campaign. One that could be about Texas versus someone who's all about himself. And that's how we're going to beat Ted Cruz. I think it's also how we can change our politics here in Texas.
Absolutely. The contrast between the absolute cynicism and the worst of politics that Ted Cruz represents and the campaign that you've built on the ground and the momentum, and then all the way up to the top of the ticket with what we have with Harris Walls, it could be really profound because I don't believe that a Republican has ever won the presidential election without winning Texas, right? So that would change everything, and it would really surprise the hell out of a lot of people. I think. And that'll be in large part, I think, possible because of the campaign that you're running. So we're really grateful for it. Simon, do you have any other final questions?
No, I just want to say good luck. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, Congressman, and you have really done an extraordinary job. You've surprised people. I mean, it was so easy to write off this race. $30 million is an incredible achievement. You're leading now, I think, in 2 separate polls, right, in the last 10 days. What you've done is incredible. And I'm just really proud of you. And if there's any final words you have for our audience about how they can help you if they want to get involved in your campaign.
Yeah, I'll just say, please go to colinallred.com. Obviously donate what you can. We're a huge state, but if you have the capacity, come to Texas. If you're in Texas, be a part of our efforts to turn out the vote. We are in a situation where there is no shortage of jobs to do in terms of helping us get the vote out. And to me, it's one of the most rewarding things of any election. I've done this for some time, even before I ever ran for office. I think that this phase of elections where you're just getting out the vote is incredibly rewarding for the people themselves who are doing it, because you're giving someone the empowerment to be involved in their democracy and to go in a different direction and to basically say, hey, listen, it's voting time. Here's your polling place. Here's when you can go. Here's what you need. And you're empowering them. And as somebody who comes from a single parent household where my mom was working more than one job oftentimes, I know how important these kind of little reminders can be, getting a phone call, getting a door knock. And so it's really great. So go to colinallred.com, get involved with us in any way you can, and let's beat Ted Cruz, and let's make sure that Texas gets a senator who cares about all 30 million of us.
Good luck. Thank you so much. Bring it home.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
I hope next time we see you, we call you Senator.
Yeah, let's do it.